On this channel, we've built islands from nothing. We've laid railway tracks across the roof of the world. We've watched a tower climb toward 1 full kilometer in the Saudi desert. Today, we leave Earth. Because one man decided the problem with getting to space was that nobody had built the right city for it. So he built one. From nothing, on the southern tip of Texas, on land so remote that in 2008, it had a population of 6 people. 6. Today, it is an official American city with a mayor, a police department, its own laws. Its name is Starbase. And it was built for one reason only: to launch the human race to Mars. Starbase sits at the very southern tip of Texas, a narrow peninsula between the Gulf of Mexico and the Rio Grande, about 20 miles east of Brownsville. The nearest city of any real size is an hour away by road. For almost all of its history, this stretch of coastline was nothing: a handful of beach houses, a wildlife refuge, sand and heat and silence. Then, in 2012, a company quietly started buying land. That company was SpaceX, and what they came here to build was the production site, testing ground, and launch pad for the most powerful rocket ever built by any human civilization. How powerful? The Saturn V sent Apollo astronauts to the moon. For decades, it was the most powerful rocket ever fired. 7.6 million pounds of thrust, the greatest machine humanity had ever built. Starship generates 16 million pounds of thrust, more than twice the Saturn V. 120 meters tall, 5,000 tons when fully fueled. And every single component of it, the engines, the hull, the launch tower, designed, built, and tested right here at Starbase, Texas. But before we talk about the rocket, we need to talk about the city. Because the story of how Starbase was built from nothing, that story is just as wild. Most people watch a rocket launch and think about the rocket. Nobody thinks about the water. The Boca Chica Peninsula had almost no freshwater infrastructure when SpaceX arrived, so they built their own. Water storage, water supply, water treatment, from scratch in the Texas coastal heat. Then power. Industrial rocket manufacturing is ferociously energy intensive. Welding operations, cryogenic fuel systems, high-pressure testing equipment, all running at the same time. The local grid wasn't built for any of this. SpaceX built dedicated electrical supply lines and backup generation systems to support it. Roads. The existing roads around Boca Chica were narrow and quiet, built for beach traffic and bird watchers, not for convoys moving rocket components the size of buildings. SpaceX upgraded them, in some sections rerouted them entirely. And then, the port. Starbase has its own dock on the Brownsville ship channel, not a jetty, a full dedicated marine facility, the kind you'd associate with a naval base or a major industrial port, built by a private company so they could receive bulk material shipments and move finished hardware by sea. Water, power, roads, a port, all of it built in parallel with the rocket itself. Because here's the thing about Starbase that almost nobody talks about. The rocket and the city were constructed at the same time. The engineers designing the Raptor engines were working 10 minutes down the road from the crews pouring the concrete foundations. The launch pad was being built while the rocket that would eventually destroy it was still being designed. That is either the most efficient way to build a space program ever conceived, or the most chaotic. At Starbase, those two things turned out to be the same. The land SpaceX chose was not entirely empty. It had a name: Boca Chica Village. Founded in 1967, a property developer from Chicago had a dream: a working-class beach community for Polish immigrants on the Gulf Coast of Texas. Then Hurricane Beulah arrived that same year and destroyed most of what had been built. The community never really recovered. By 2008, 6 permanent residents, a few dozen ranch-style houses on 3 quiet streets, retirees, birdwatchers, people who wanted to be left alone at the very edge of the world. They were about to have the opposite experience. SpaceX started buying, quietly at first, then with serious money. They offered homeowners 3 times the fair market value. Some were happy to accept. Some refused, Texas flags hanging above their doors, rocket prototypes being assembled on the land next door. Then came the letter. A SpaceX finance executive wrote to the remaining holdouts. The tone was polite. The message was not. The launches were going to keep increasing. The hazard zones were going to keep expanding. Eventually, staying would become impossible. SpaceX called it their best and final offer. Most signed. The old houses were repainted gray and white. Airstream trailers appeared in every driveway. The streets that had once belonged to retirees now belonged to rocket engineers, working 12-hour shifts on the most ambitious aerospace project in history, then stepping outside to watch their own rockets explode on the test pad 2 miles away. Because in those early years, they exploded. A lot. SpaceX did not arrive at Boca Chica with a blueprint. They arrived with an idea and a tolerance for chaos. Engineers lived on site in campers and RV trailers. Manufacturing happened under large canvas tents, the kind you hire for a summer event, because proper facilities didn't exist yet. Teams worked around the clock in the Gulf Coast heat, building prototype rockets by hand in a field next to the beach. Between 2019 and 2021, SpaceX launched a series of early Starship prototypes in full public view, live-streamed, millions watching online. Steel cylinders flipping upside down, descending gracefully through the Texas sky, beautiful and terrifying at the same time, then exploding. SN8 exploded, SN9 exploded, SN10 landed, then exploded 8 minutes later on the pad. Then, on May 5, 2021, SN15 touched down cleanly, stayed standing, and didn't explode. The crowd at Starbase lost their minds. But landing the rocket was only the beginning of what Starbase was about to learn. April 20th, 2023, the first fully integrated Starship launch, both stages stacked, full stack, the most powerful rocket ever assembled, sitting on the pad at Boca Chica for the first time. The world was watching. SpaceX was ready. The 33 Raptor engines ignited. The shockwave from that ignition, the raw energy of 33 engines firing simultaneously, tore the concrete launch pad apart. Chunks of debris were thrown hundreds of meters in every direction. A crater opened beneath the launch mount. The surrounding area was buried under concrete, soil, and shrapnel. Local vehicles were damaged. Roads were coated in debris. The rocket itself flew for about 4 minutes before the flight termination system ended the mission. SpaceX engineers called it a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. Everyone else called it an explosion. The FAA launched an investigation. Starship was grounded for months. SpaceX went back to the drawing board, not on the rocket, but on the ground beneath it. What they built in response is one of the most remarkable engineering solutions at Starbase. They call it the water deluge system. The internet calls it Niagara. Directly beneath the launch mount, SpaceX constructed a massive steel plate perforated with thousands of nozzles, connected to tanks holding hundreds of tons of water. In the seconds before ignition, that water is released at enormous pressure, flooding the space under the rocket in a fraction of a second. The physics are straightforward. Water absorbs energy. It converts the shock wave from 33 simultaneous engine ignitions, the same energy that was tearing apart concrete, into a billowing cloud of steam. That tower of white vapor you see rising from every successful Starship launch? That is the ground absorbing a force that would otherwise destroy everything around it. The Niagara system, built, tested, and operational within months of the disaster, is itself one of the largest and most sophisticated flame mitigation systems ever constructed for any rocket program. It exists because the first attempt failed catastrophically. And that, more than anything, is the philosophy that built Starbase. NASA's Space Launch System, the rocket designed to return Americans to the moon, took over a decade from concept to its first flight. Billions of dollars, thousands of engineers, years of analysis, simulation, and review at every stage. SpaceX does it differently. They build, they fly, they fail, loudly, publicly, spectacularly, and then they learn. Every explosion generated data that no simulation could replicate. Every failure told the engineers something a successful test never would have. The craters, the debris, the FAA investigations, all of it fed directly back into the next version. It is not a philosophy that makes everyone comfortable. It has attracted lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and serious criticism from environmental groups and the surrounding community. But the hardware is flying, the booster is being caught, and the pace is only accelerating. Which brings us to the thing that made every serious space journalist stop and genuinely ask if what they were seeing was real. But something else had been growing through all of this too. The tents came down. In their place rose the Star Factory. 1 million square feet of permanent manufacturing facility. The building Elon Musk calls the machine that builds the machine. Inside, stainless steel rings are welded into cylinders. Nose cones are shaped and fitted. Heat shield tiles are applied one by hand. And Raptor engines, 33 of them, are installed on boosters the size of skyscrapers. The Star Factory doesn't look like any building you've ever walked past. It looks like what happens when a car factory and a shipyard have a child, and that child grows up wanting to go to Mars. 2 miles from the factory, at the edge of the Gulf of Mexico, stands the launch site. And at the center of the launch site stands the most dramatic piece of construction I have ever tried to explain to another human being. Mechazilla. 146 meters of steel tower, built for one purpose: to catch a rocket. Not land it on legs, not splash it into the ocean. Physically catch it, mid-air, with arms. Here's how it works. The Super Heavy booster launches. It pushes Starship towards space, then separates. And then, instead of being discarded into the sea like every other rocket booster in history, it turns around. It falls back through the atmosphere. It reignites 3 of its 33 engines to slow the descent. And it positions itself with centimeter-level precision between 2 enormous hydraulic arms mounted near the top of Mechazilla. If anything goes wrong, the booster is diverted to a splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. But if everything goes right, the arms close. The booster, the most powerful first stage ever built, hangs in the air, held by a tower on the same pad it launched from just 20 minutes earlier. SpaceX achieved this for the first time in October 2024, then again in early 2025. Then, and this is the part that still does not feel real, they took that same caught booster and launched it again on a subsequent mission. Caught, inspected, refueled, relaunched. The next commentator standing at Starbase called it the most significant engineering achievement since the moon landing. It's hard to disagree. Why does catching matter so much? Because the entire economics of space travel change when a booster worth tens of millions of dollars can be turned around and relaunched within hours, instead of being thrown away after every single flight. SpaceX's stated goal is to launch Starship multiple times a day from a single pad. That is not a rocket program. That is an airline. Now we get to the part of this story that has never happened before, anywhere, in any industry, in any country. May 3rd, 2025, an election in Boca Chica Village, Texas. 283 people were eligible to vote. 212 voted yes. 6 voted no. 6. That vote officially incorporated the area as a Texas municipality, the first new city in Cameron County in 30 years. Its name? Starbase, Texas. The mayor elected that day was Bobby Peden, SpaceX Vice President of Test and Launch Operations. He ran unopposed. The two commissioners elected alongside him were also SpaceX employees, also unopposed. Of the 247 residential lots inside the city boundaries, only 10 were not owned by SpaceX or its employees. 10. Just stop for a second and think about what that means. A private company voted itself a city. Its employees are the residents. The mayor works for the CEO. The commissioners work for the CEO. The electorate, almost in its entirety, works for the CEO. As of early 2026, Starbase operates its own police department. It issues its own building permits. It writes its own zoning laws. And it is planning to annex 7,133 additional acres of surrounding land, which would grow the city to roughly 8,000 acres in total. Critics called it exactly what it looks like: a private corporation using a legal process to seize control of public land, remove regulatory oversight, and close a public beach whenever they decide to launch a rocket. Supporters called it the only rational way to build the infrastructure for the most important engineering project in human history, and argued that the existing regulatory system simply was not designed for what SpaceX is trying to do. Elon Musk marked the occasion with a single post on X. Starbase, Texas is now a real city. 6 people voted no. Here is the thing about Starbase right now. The city that was incorporated in May 2025 is not the city SpaceX is building toward. Not even close. Right now, as you watch this video, construction is underway on what SpaceX intends to become one of the largest industrial structures ever built. They call it the Gigabay. Construction began on July 1, 2025. Target completion, December 2026. Cost, $250 million. It will stand 380 feet tall, roughly the height of a 38-story building, 46.5 million cubic feet of interior space, 815,000 square feet of workspace, 24 individual rocket assembly work cells operating simultaneously, cranes capable of lifting 400 tons. And what is the Gigabay designed to produce? Up to 1,000 Starship rockets per year. In January 2026, someone asked Elon Musk whether that was really the ambition. He replied, and this is a direct quote, "Maybe as high as 10,000 ships per year." 10,000. The entire global space launch industry, every rocket from every country combined, launches roughly 200 missions per year. SpaceX is building a single facility in one small Texas city with the stated ambition to produce 50 times that number. And this is not the only Gigabay. SpaceX is simultaneously building a second one at Cape Canaveral in Florida. The FAA has approved 25 launches per year from Starbase, 44 from Florida. SpaceX has formally requested even higher numbers from both locations. What is being built in South Texas right now is not infrastructure for a rocket company. It is infrastructure for an interplanetary transport system. Before we talk about Mars, let's talk about the people who are already here. Brownsville, Texas, 20 miles to the west of Starbase. For most of its history, one of the poorest cities in the United States. One of the lowest median household incomes in the country. Generations of families in a border town that the rest of America rarely had reason to think about. SpaceX changed that, faster than almost anyone anticipated. Today, SpaceX directly employs 4,300 people at Starbase, a figure expected to reach 8,000 by the end of 2026. 70% of those workers are local, from Brownsville, from Harlingen, from San Benito, from small towns across the Rio Grande Valley that had never had a rocket company in them before. $13 billion added to the South Texas economy in just the past 2 years. $305 million in indirect tax revenue. 24,000 jobs, direct and indirect, supported across the region. In 2025, Brownsville was ranked the #1 metropolitan area in the United States for economic strength. #1. The city that was once defined by poverty is now defined by rocket launches. Every Starship test flight draws an estimated 20,000 spectators. Hotels fill within hours of a launch announcement. Restaurants along the Gulf Coast are booked weeks in advance. There are people who drive from across Texas just to stand on a beach and watch the engines light up the sky. But there is another side to all of this. In June 2025, an explosion at SpaceX's test site sent debris across the Rio Grande into Mexico. The Mexican government threatened legal action. Environmental groups have documented rocket exhaust drifting over protected wildlife habitats and failed launches raining debris across Caribbean airspace, disrupting hundreds of commercial flights. A public beach that has existed for generations gets closed on SpaceX's schedule whenever they decide to fire a rocket. These are not small concerns. They are the very real friction points of a future being built in real time, on real land, near real people, with real consequences on both sides. A city that did not exist 5 years ago, built by one company, aimed at a destination humans have never reached. Picture this. A rocket the size of a 40-story building lifts off from a narrow strip of Texas coastline at 2 in the morning. The 33 engines light up the Gulf of Mexico for 50 miles in every direction. People watching from the beach in Brownsville pull out their phones. Families on South Padre Island wake up and look out their windows at a sky on fire. And then, 20 minutes later, the booster falls back from the edge of space, and a machine on the ground reaches out its arms and catches it. That is Starbase in 2026. We have covered a lot of builds on this channel. Islands pushed out into the sea, railway tracks laid across the highest plateau on Earth, towers racing toward 1 full kilometer. Every single one of those builds was made for people on this planet. Starbase is the first build we have ever covered that was not. It was built to leave. The factory, the launch pad, the tower that catches rockets, the Gigabay rising right now to 380 feet. All of it exists for one stated, public, unashamed purpose: to make human beings a multi-planetary species, to put 1 million people on Mars. You can think that sounds impossible. A lot of serious, thoughtful people do. In 2012, the idea of a private company building the world's most powerful rocket in a forgotten ghost town on the Texas coast also sounded impossible. In 2019, the idea of a rocket booster landing itself back on a pad sounded impossible. In 2024, the idea of a 70-story booster being physically caught in mid-air by a mechanical arm sounded like science fiction. Impossible has not had a great track record at Starbase. Next up on Titan projects. China. 230 airports, 20 years. How does one country build more airports than the rest of the world combined? And what does that do to the cities growing up around them? Subscribe. We are just getting started. Titan projects. We build the impossible.